Be honest. The choice is freedom or tyranny. A line has been drawn in the sand. Clear boundaries are set. They have always been set. We seem to, as a collective, have forgotten about these boundaries. We are trampling all over the line and are dangerously close to stepping over the line definitively and falling into the abyss of our choice. What line am I talking about? The line between living in a world that respects the inherent rights and dignities of all human beings and living in a world that does not and instead concurs with turning a blind eye to that bedrock of a free society whenever it suits. It is important to remember that public health officials only advise elected members of governing bodies. They do not make laws or dictate to the people. Elected members of governing bodies work for the people. They do not dictate to the people. Police took oaths to serve and protect the inherent rights and dignities of all human beings without favor or affection. They are not enforcers of dictates from dictators. Think about those two words carefully: dictate and dictator. A person who dictates is a dictator. It's as simple as that. If I demand, you must do as I say, threatening punishment or death for not obeying me completely, then I am not respecting your free will. I am also creating a scenario that controls your perception of what choices are open to you. I am in your mind because I cause you to fear, and that activates your sympathetic nervous system and leaves you too agitated to see that I really have zero power over you. Respect of all people, whether they are in the minority or the majority, is a core tenet of a free society. It does not matter if the person holds a different opinion, belief, political stance, or makes a contrary choice based on his or her conscience. If we respect the inherent rights and dignity of all human beings, we cannot censor information. We cannot force anyone to put a mask on their face. We cannot force anyone to wear anything. We cannot force anyone to take a drug or force them to undergo a medical procedure. We cannot force anyone to speak using only the words we deem acceptable. We cannot force anyone to stay in their home, to stand 6 feet apart, to restrict their freedom of movement. We cannot force anyone to follow the dictates of another. There must be respect for choice. How we treat our most vulnerable is always a measuring stick that shows how civil, how compassionate, how humane we are individually and as a society. The lockdown measures and the mask mandates have had adverse effects on masses of people across the globe. Mainstream media will not be open about the negative effects because they demand compliance, using fear, shame, and guilt to control people. But think for a minute what the whole picture is. Every medical intervention has both benefits and risks, and there must be 100% transparency on both ends. The elderly have been shut off from their loved ones near the end of their lives, while they are already suffering from various ailments and know their time is limited. It is difficult in and of itself to enter a nursing or long term care home. These homes were never designed to provide 100% patient care. They were dependent on loved ones visiting and spending time with residents, bringing gifts, having conversations. We know that self isolation and loneliness kills and have a severe effect on the elderly, many of whom cannot move about unassisted and rely on loved ones to take them out for day trips. An elderly person's choice in the matter must be respected. And if a medical intervention is recommended, it cannot be dictated. Then the elderly person must be fully informed of all risks and benefits, and the choice must be theirs alone. This is also a tenet of the Code of Ethics for medical professionals. Think about what we've been doing to our children. We are woefully making knee jerk reactions and flooding our brains with mainstream media bullshit. There is no other word for it. That we are blatantly being criminally negligent, recklessly endangering our own children who are not being allowed to say no. This is child abuse. Ignorance is not an excuse. If you are a responsible adult who is entrusted with the care of a young life, you have a choice to do your diligence, to research on the mask science, the social distancing science, the isolation science. This means examining the adverse effects, not just looking for information that confirms your bias. Of course, it is your choice whether you do so or not. But remember, children are human beings with inherent rights and dignities as well. If they do not want to wear a mask, they should not be forced to do so. If you believe they should be forced, then produce your evidence with 100% transparency and be ready to take full accountability for whatever harms do come to those who have been coerced by you. What you are doing is taking full responsibility for another's life. You've taken away the free will of the other and asserted yourself as master and God. Think about what the lockdowns and mask mandates have done to those who are poor and those who are now in that same category due to losing their businesses or jobs, many of whom have also been evicted from their homes. You may be sitting comfortably in your home with your work now online, no bump in your income, and you think it is absolutely wonderful. Well, good for you. But public health isn't just about you, is it? If you have been involved in shaming people to wear a mask or stay at home, you should be ready and willing to help those who are collateral damage to your dictates. You should be willing to accept that your income be split to go to help a family that just lost their home, to children who no longer have access to education, to business owners who lost their business, to a man who just lost his job and now finds himself waiting in line at a food bank. Instead of virtue signaling, why not go out there and do something to help? And when I say this, I do not mean asking the government to provide to others. I do not ask for redistribution of wealth, but taking personal responsibility, personal, individual accountability for what you say and do. Think about all of those people who have committed suicide, the elderly who refused to continue living, the people who had medical care canceled, people suffering with infections in their mouth who could not see a dentist. If you simply reacted out of fear, admit it and own it. If you did not demand 100% transparency and that we take a collective, responsible, whole picture approach, admit it and own it. We need to be honest with ourselves. What we call for is very simple. We call for 100% transparency, and the burden of proof is on those who claim the lockdowns, the masks, the vaccines work. We call for 100% informed consent as laid out in the Nuremberg Code, the Code of Medical Ethics, and the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. We call for 100% respect of the inherent rights and dignities of all human beings. If you do not agree with those statements, then you must be honest with yourself and own your choices. You are openly accepting a medical dictatorship. You do not respect the bedrock of freedom, justice, and peace as stated in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which are our inherent rights and dignities. You do not care about 100% transparency. You believe in censorship, dictates, control, and turning a blind eye to our fundamental rights whenever it suits. You do not believe in the inherent rights of freedom of conscience and the right to choose for oneself. You agree with stepping over that line. Be honest with it. This is the line. Where do you stand?